You think you know what a queen looks like. You imagine silk and sapphires, a smile carved from marble, a crown that glitters when the sunlight hits it just right. But the woman standing before you isn't made of silver and silk. She's made of iron. The air around her is dry. Her sleeves are dark and simple. Her mouth is thin, pressed into a line that hasn't bent for joy in weeks. And her eyes, God help you, her eyes don't blink unless she chooses. You're standing in a courtyard outside a convent. It's morning, but the stones under your feet are already warm. Smoke rises in the distance, not from chimneys, from ash. Somewhere out there, someone is burning. And the fire carries her name. She doesn't flinch. The priest bows low, too low. He says a few words about God's will, about purifying the realm, about the holy burden of leadership. She nods once, not out of reverence, out of patience. This isn't new for her. You're here because someone needs to die. A merchant, perhaps, or a soldier who questioned orders, a woman who didn't kneel fast enough. The reason doesn't matter. The process is the point. She turns toward you, not because you're important, but because you're close, and for a moment her gaze holds yours. You try to breathe normally. She looks at you the way a falcon looks at a mouse, without hatred, without interest, without mercy. You break eye contact first. She's not the queen from bedtime stories. She doesn't sing, she doesn't dance, she doesn't ask permission, she doesn't forgive. Her name is Isabella, and she will reshape the world to match the shape of her fear. When she was young, they called her devout, quiet, obedient. She prayed every morning, fasted twice a week. She refused to laugh at vulgar stories and kept her eyes lowered in court. But even then, there were signs. She remembered insults too long, smiled too tightly at betrayal. And when she learned to read Latin, she read everything. Not just scripture, law, inheritance, church history, punishments, the fine print of who lives and who dies. She understood early that heaven may be eternal, but royal power isn't. Kings die, factions shift, bloodlines crumble, unless you make people afraid to change them. She watched the king weep, nobles beginning. She saw her half-brother rule Castile like a drunk in a burning house, squandering armies, humiliating their name, leaving the kingdom exposed. So when she was offered marriage, she didn't ask about the man's kindness or eyes. She asked what lands he controlled, what armies he could raise, what priests supported him. She married Ferdinand of Aragon, not for love, for leverage. Their marriage united two kingdoms and set fire to the rest. From that day on, Spain would bend or break beneath their rule. And she, this quiet girl with folded hands, became something else. A queen who never bowed again. She wore black long before mourning required it, refused jewels unless they had a holy purpose, carried prayer books bound in leather and stared down generals twice her size. She called herself La Católica, not because she followed God, but because she believed he followed her. And when dissent came, she didn't meet it with anger. She met it with precision. Edicts, arrests, secret councils, and fire. She surrounded herself with men who understood her silence better than any sermon. Priests who didn't speak unless it was to condemn. Soldiers who knew a soft voice could be more terrifying than a shouted order. She gave them tools, a throne, a mandate, and an enemy. And they gave her blood. But it didn't start with mass executions. It started like this. A knock at the door. A question about your mother's baptism. A document gone missing. A neighbour's whisper. And then, one morning, you're not allowed in church. The Queen never raises her voice, never lowers herself to accusation. She doesn't have to, because fear does the speaking. By the time you realise it's her hand at your throat, it's already too late. She walks through cities like a shadow. Priests bow, judges nod, the people fall silent. And when she leaves, There are fewer names on the census than before. This is not the story of a madwoman, or a tyrant blinded by rage. This is a queen who studied cruelty like scripture, who used piety as a knife, and who believed, down to her bones, that cleansing was mercy, even when the scream said otherwise. It started with a whisper. A merchant's wife spotted lighting candles on the wrong day, a butcher who avoided pork, a child repeating Hebrew prayers in secret. None of it proved anything, but proof wasn't needed, only suspicion. And Isabella gave suspicion a crown. She called it faith. But it wasn't the kind that saves. It was the kind that purifies, with heat, with iron, with silence. She didn't invent the Inquisition, but she turned it into something else, something permanent, something terrifying, something holy. When she summoned Tomás de Torquemada to court, she didn't ask him for advice. She asked him for obedience, and he gave it. In return, she gave him power, the power to question, to punish, to burn. Torquemada was no priest of mercy. He was sharp, efficient, a man who believed that truth could be extracted like marrow from bone. Together they restructured Spain, not with war, with paperwork. Edicts began appearing across Castile. Jews must convert or leave. Conversos, those who had already converted, would be monitored, questioned, investigated. Because some of them, Isabella claimed, were pretending, worshipping in secret, polluting the body of Christ. But what did pretending mean? It meant lighting candles on Friday night, or speaking Ladino, or washing a child's body in a certain way, or breathing too freely after Mass. It meant being different, quietly. And that for Isabella was the gravest sin. She believed unity demanded purity, not just of blood, but of belief, not just public obedience, but internal surrender. You had to believe what she believed, or you had to vanish. So the fires began, first in small towns, then in cities, then across the kingdom. People were given a choice, confess or die. But confession didn't save you, not always. You might be spared the stake, you might be flogged instead, or imprisoned, or made to wear the shameful garment called the San Benito, a tunic marked with flames and crosses and your name, so everyone knew what you were, so your children would carry that mark forever, some burned regardless, because the Inquisition wasn't about guilt, it was about fear. The trials weren't fair, witnesses remained anonymous, torture was permitted, evidence optional, a single rumour, a jealous neighbour, a misheard prayer, that's all it took. And once you were accused, there was no escape. Isabella knew this. She didn't pretend otherwise. She read reports, approved funding, built prisons, signed orders. She didn't flinch when told of the methods, strappado, rack, starvation. She asked whether the process was consistent. That was her word. Consistent. There are records, cold, tidy, signed in ink, of her approving hundreds of executions at once. Not for murder, not for theft, for theology. She saw it as moral bookkeeping. Spain was being cleansed, and she was the hand of the flame. Her defenders called her pious, disciplined, unshakable. But discipline without mercy is still cruelty. And piety that kills becomes a sickness. Thousands fled. Entire communities disappeared overnight. Families who had lived in Spain for centuries packed what they could and vanished. Some drowned at sea. Others were robbed on the road. Others reached distant shores with only their names and the memory of fire. And still she pressed on. Because to Isabella this wasn't exile. It was justice. Her version of it. Some begged her to reconsider. Merchants warned of economic collapse. Priests questioned the theology. Even Ferdinand hesitated. She did not. She signed the Alhambra decree with a steady hand. Every Jew in Spain, convert or not, was to leave or die. And their property, forfeited. Their homes, reclaimed. Their books and heirlooms and synagogues, gone. But she didn't watch them leave. She had other matters to attend to: processions, banquets, cathedrals to bless, a kingdom to keep pure. When she walked through the palace gardens, she didn't hear the screams. When she prayed in her private chapel, she didn't see the soot on the wind. She saw herself as righteous, a hammer of God, a mother purging sickness from her child's body. But the sickness was in her reflection. She believed that fire could cure anything, even the soul. And when the flames rose, she watched without blinking. Because for Isabella, mercy wasn't holy. Control was. They were too young to know they were betraying their blood. Some were infants, others were just learning to speak. A few could still remember their parents' faces. Most forgot them. That was the point. Isabella didn't just want conversions. She wanted erasure. Not fast, not loud, quiet, final. And the best place to start was with the ones who couldn't fight back: children. When Jewish and Muslim families were forced to leave Spain, not all were allowed to take their children. If the child had been baptized, willingly or not, they became property of the church, and the church answered to the crown. That meant her. So hundreds, maybe thousands, were separated. Sons pulled from mothers, daughters sent to monasteries, boys renamed Juan or Pedro or Diego. Girls became Maria, Isabel, Catalina. Their hair was cut, their clothes burned, their languages were beaten out of them. Hebrew and Arabic were replaced with Latin prayers and Castilian silence. Isabella called it salvation, but it was suffocating. In her eyes, she was rescuing souls from damnation, giving them a new life, a cleaner name, a second chance. And in a way, she was right, because the first life had been stolen. These children were not raised with warmth. They were raised with fear. The church didn't know what to do with them. The crown didn't pay for their care. Monks beat them into obedience. Nuns scrubbed their mouths with soap for speaking the old words. Some tried to run. Few succeeded. Because where could they go? They didn't know their own names anymore. Didn't remember the roads back to the families they'd been torn from. The world they once knew had burned behind them, and she never looked back. Isabella visited a convent once, just outside Toledo. Rows of little girls in veils, kneeling, whispering Latin hymns. Some looked up when she passed. One stared too long. The Queen stared back. No smile, no warmth, only the cold judgment of a woman who believed obedience was love. That girl didn't cry. She just looked away. Years later, a letter would surface. A nun wrote of a child who scratched her family's names into the wooden bedpost every night before sleep, until her hands bled. The letter was unsigned. It was never sent. Some of these children lived to adulthood. Some even rose in the church. But many more faded, half-formed, torn between the blood they carried and the cross they were made to bear. They were not the first generation Isabella tried to remake, and they wouldn't be the last. Because once you start rewriting souls, you don't stop at childhood. You keep going, until the whole kingdom speaks in your voice. She called her Joanna in public, Juana la Bella, Joanna the Beautiful. But beauty meant nothing to Isabella unless it served something. The daughter was not a girl, not a soul, not a child. A daughter was a strategy. Joanna was third born, not meant to rule, but blood has its own ideas. And when her elder siblings died, one by fever, one by childbirth, Joanna moved up the ladder, closer to the throne, closer to danger. Isabella didn't celebrate. She adjusted. She arranged a marriage, not for love, for leverage. Joanna was sent to Flanders to marry Philip of Habsburg, called the Handsome, though he had the warmth of marble. He was cold, ambitious, dismissive. Isabella didn't care. What mattered was the alliance. A daughter in the Habsburg line meant Spanish blood could stretch beyond the Pyrenees, meant control, meant reach. So she sent Joanna away, young and nervous, with a strict entourage and pages of rules. When to speak, how to kneel, what to wear, what to hide, what to fear. But Joanna had something Isabella never expected. Feelings. She loved too hard, needed too deeply. When Philip smiled, she lit up. When he strayed, she wept. Loudly, publicly. And in Isabella's world, that was weakness. News reached Castile quickly. Joanna was too emotional, too dependent, too unstable. She ignored her ladies in waiting, screamed in her chambers, tore at her clothes when Philip took other women, fainted from grief, refused to eat. Isabella read every letter and clenched her teeth. She didn't see heartbreak, she saw disobedience. A queen doesn't cry over a man, a queen doesn't beg for affection, a queen does not unravel. Isabella sent orders, rein in her behaviour, reduce her freedom, cut her allowance, restrict her letters, keep her busy, keep her quiet. But Joanna was not made for silence. She kept breaking the rules, crying in processions, interrupting mass, demanding her husband's love in front of courtiers. Her devotion became a kind of madness, and her madness became a stain. To Isabella, this wasn't mental illness, it was insubordination. When Philip died unexpectedly, some said from fever, others whispered poison, Joanna collapsed, refused burial, travelled with his coffin across Castile, opening the lid to speak with him, dress him, pray over him. It was grief, yes, but also protest, against her mother, against the world that said she couldn't feel. The stories spread fast. The mad queen, the weeping widow, the woman walking barefoot in black speaking to a corpse. Joanna became a legend, and legends are dangerous. Isabella acted quickly. She summoned her daughter, questioned her, judged her, then quietly declared her unfit to rule, unstable, incapable, a danger to the crown, no trial, no hearing, just a mother's word, and a nation bowed. Joanna was locked away, first in a guarded estate, then in a tower, then in a cell. She stayed there for decades. One of the Queen's surviving letters reads like a death sentence in silk. She must be protected, or for her own good, and the good of Spain. But Joanna didn't need protection. She needed to be believed. Visitors were screened, books removed, the windows were blocked. Even servants were chosen for silence. She was permitted to pray, to sit, to age, but not to rule, and that was the point. Because Isabella didn't fear her daughter's mind, she feared her daughter's power. The bloodline passed through Joanna now. She was mother to kings, mother to emperors, but not even her children could undo what Isabella had done. The cruelty wasn't loud, it was quiet, clinical, permanent, a lifetime of locked doors disguised as care. And all the while, Isabella's image remained saintly, the mother of Catholic Spain, the defender of faith, the woman who gave her kingdom everything, even her daughter, especially her daughter. It was called the Reconquista, but it wasn't about land, it was about sin. At least that's what Isabella told herself. Granada was the last Muslim stronghold in Spain, a kingdom of gardens and minarets, of poets and traders, where Arabic calligraphy adorned the palace walls and the call to prayer echoed over rooftops. Isabella saw none of that. She saw a stain. She saw a reminder that Spain had once belonged to someone else, that Christians weren't always in charge, that another faith had flourished here for centuries, and she wanted that erased, not just defeated, removed, cleansed, forgotten. The war began with banners, gold and crimson sewn with crosses. Her army knelt before battle. Priests gave sermons between sword drills. Each soldier was promised forgiveness for every sin they'd ever committed if they fought in the Queen's name. They called it a holy war. But it wasn't about God. It was about fear and hunger. Isabella didn't rush the conquest. She starved it, surrounded the city, cut off grain routes, burned fields, poisoned wells. Anyone who fled was captured. Anyone captured was questioned. Anyone questioned was broken. The siege lasted months. Inside the city, families boiled leather for soup. Children cried in their sleep from thirst. The mosques fell silent. The libraries shuttered. The great palaces cracked from the cold. Still, Granada held. Until one morning the gates opened, not from surrender, from collapse. And Isabella walked in, not like a conqueror, but like a judge. No blood on her dress, no sword in hand, just a crucifix. She went straight to the Alhambra, the jewel of the Nasrid dynasty, and claimed it without a word. She didn't destroy it. That wasn't her style. She repurposed it. Let the architecture stay. Let the tiles glimmer, but scrub the meaning. She ordered the Quran removed. The calligraphy painted over. The courtyards were renamed. What had once been sacred became scenery. What had once been prayer became stone. Granada was now Christian, and she would make sure it acted like it. At first, the Muslim population was promised tolerance, freedom of religion, protection. That's what the surrender treaty said. She broke it within months. Arabic was outlawed, traditional dress banned, mosques converted into churches, school children forced to recite the Lord's Prayer, men ordered to take Christian names, women stripped of veils, families split, culture torn root from root, and when people protested she sent in the friars, not to reason, to baptize, by force. There's a record of one spring festival where entire villages were gathered and marched into the river, men, women, even infants, and dunked beneath the water while priests read Latin phrases most couldn't understand. They emerged cold, coughing, confused, but now they were Christians, whether they wanted to be or not. Rebellions followed, small uprisings in the mountains, acts of desperation. But she answered with fire. Villages were flattened, books burned, dissenters hanged in public squares. She called it stability. The world called it conquest. But in Granada, no one celebrated. 1,000 years of Muslim culture collapsed in less than a year. Poets silenced, scientists displaced, merchants ruined. The people didn't just lose a city, they lost their past. And Isabella stood on the walls looking down. She claimed it was for God. But the gods of war wear many faces. To her this prophecy was fulfilled. Her image was painted in cathedrals, banners stitched with her initials, soldiers sang songs of glory in her name, and still the bodies piled. She wrote letters thanking the Pope for his blessing, sent him captured relics, gold, silks, gifts torn from conquered homes, and in return, Rome praised her, called her defender of the faith. No one mentioned the children starved in basements, the old men who set their own libraries aflame before they could be seized, the women who cut off their hair and buried it in clay jars, trying to preserve some piece of themselves. That wasn't part of the story. The official story was triumph, the end of the infidel rule, the birth of a united Spain, a clean Christian Spain, built on ash. And she smiled, because in her eyes this wasn't cruelty, it was worship. She believed that God did not want mercy, he wanted obedience, and obedience was best taught with steel. You think it ended with her. You think when Isabella died the cruelty stopped, that the fires burned out, that the air cleared. It didn't. It grew. Her death was quiet, no spectacle, no pyres, just a royal bed, a few courtiers, a final prayer. She whispered her last breath with a crucifix in hand. They say her eyes stayed open for a long time after, long enough to unsettle even the most faithful servant. Ferdinand wept. Her daughter Joanna was too far gone to respond, and Spain, the kingdom she built on broken bones, moved on. But it didn't forget, because she had taught it how to remember by repeating her lessons. Every policy she set became precedent. Every purge became a blueprint. The empire that followed was shaped in her image, not out of love, out of fear and ambition. The New World was already calling. Ships had left under her banner. Columbus had returned with promises, gold, land, souls to convert. She'd listened, smiled, approved more voyages, not because she craved discovery, but because she craved dominion. The same methods she used in Granada were now exported across oceans. Conversion or death. Order through destruction. Faith enforced by the sword. In Cuba, whole villages vanished in months. In Mexico, cities burned for refusing the cross. In Peru, temples were levelled and saints nailed up in their place. It wasn't called murder, it was called salvation, and her name was always close. The Spanish priests who baptized native children held up her example. The governors who ordered executions wrote of her discipline. The kings who ruled after her carried her seal on their armour. She became a saint in everything but canon, and eventually even that changed. The Vatican began a campaign centuries later to declare her beatified, the first step to sainthood. The same woman who signed the expulsion of Jews, who funded the Inquisition, who imprisoned her own daughter, who watched cities fall silent and called it peace. They painted her with a halo, called her Isabella Cattolica, a woman of virtue, chaste, holy, devoted. But devotion isn't always good. Sometimes it corrodes. Sometimes it smothers everything else. Mercy, reason, love. Until only the devotion remains. Blind, rigid, cold. That was her gift to history. She didn't just kill people. She killed space for difference. She killed language, music, story. Whole cultures suffocated under her rule, erased from textbooks, exiled from memory. The Jews of Toledo, the Moors of Cordoba, the storytellers of Seville, the weavers of Granada. Their lives turned to ash, their names turned to whispers, and centuries later their descendants still search for pieces. A last name that doesn't quite fit. A recipe passed down without origin. A lullaby hummed in secret. Words half forgotten. All remnants of a world that Isabella tried to delete. But nothing truly dies that easily. Even she hasn't. Her statues still stand in Spanish plazas. Her name is carved into palace walls. Schools still bear her signature. Coins once bore her face. Tourists walk past her tomb in Granada without knowing what she did to that city. Even in death she rules. Not as a queen, as a myth. A myth that cruelty in the name of order is strength. That faith justifies violence. That mothers must dominate to protect. That erasing the other is not a crime, but a virtue. And that is the most dangerous legacy of all. Because myths survive longer than empires, longer than laws. They survive in silence, in the things we don't question, in the voices we dismiss, in the faces we never learn to see. That's where she lives now, not in books, in absence. And if you listen closely, in the quiet corners of the world, you'll still hear her walking,